welcome back. And what I'd like to do is first off, thank all of our sponsors for the event. The Aerospace Corporation, BAE Systems, KBR, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, L3 Harris, Leidos, Northrop Grumman, and SAIC. Without all of their support, we really could not do this. So thank you very much to all of them. And thank you also to everybody on the team at NASA Goddard. Tremendous help in putting this all together. Thank you to each and every one of you. So with that, I think my next slide is the planning committee. Again, AAS is a small staff. It's just 4 of us. So we rely on the breadth and the knowledge of these planning committees to put these things together. They're the ones responsible for such a great agenda. And so we thank each and every one of them. So with that, oh yeah, social media. Please don't hesitate to say some good things about us on social media, share about your experiences here. We'd appreciate it. All right, with that, I'd like to start the day by welcoming up Steve Arnold. He is the Deputy Mission Area Executive of the Space Formulation Mission Area at Johns Hopkins APL, and he is also the symposium's Planning Committee Co-Chair. Steve.
Thank you, Jim. We'll keep it brief, but welcome to day 2. We feel like we have lined up a really excellent program for the day. A lot of discussion, great panels we've convened. I do want to kind of double down on Jim's comments about the planning committee. They did an excellent job this year. So a couple things. One, if you're interested and you would like to help shape and formulate some of the topics in future ones, let us know. We're always looking for volunteers. Second, that committee did an outstanding job this year. As you know, we're kind of in a time of turmoil, and they had to navigate potential government shutdowns, travel restrictions, all sorts of other internal company politics in order to participate today. But it's been a great turnout. That committee did a fantastic job. So again, if you're interested, let us know. And if someone from your company was on that planning committee, go out of your way and thank them, because they did an outstanding job this year. Day 2, we have an all-star lineup today. I think it's going to be very compelling. You know, this is one of the first meetings where post-administration change, we've kind of gathered as a community here in the DC area. So it feels like there's a lot of kind of pent-up conversations and interactions with partners. So take advantage of that today. We're all gathered here. We got a great lineup. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the first panel to kick us off here on day 2. Turn it over to Tom Wagner, who's going to be moderating this outstanding panel. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Our panel this morning is titled Enhancing U.S. Economic Leadership Through Science. I will say that there are a diverse range of views on this subject, and we've put together a panel that we think encompasses some of those, though I know we have a lot of different ideas out there in the audience, and we're looking for some very lively discussion. Our format is that the 3 of us are each going to give a 5-minute talk. I'll be the moderator. At the end of each talk, we'll take a few quick questions from the audience pertaining to that talk. We look to get through all that between about 25-30 minutes, and then we'll throw it open for general discussion. Our first speaker this morning will be Dr. Joel Dreesen. Joel is the meteorologist and deputy program manager for the air monitoring program at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Joel's going to tell us about some new missions, how data is used at the local levels to make decisions. Next up will be Professor Henry Hertzfeld. Henry is the research professor at the Space Policy Institute at the Elliott School of International Affairs, George Washington University, and adjunct professor of law at GW Law School. Henry's going to tell us a lot about the economic drivers and justifications for science, with a little bit also of a historical perspective. And then last will be me, Tom Wagner. I'm the Associate Director for Earth Sciences at NASA headquarters. And I'm going to be talking a lot about how we're seeing our data used in the private sectors and some inflection points that I see in the near future. And with that, we will turn the mic over to Joel.
All right, thanks, Tom. All right, mic check. You guys hear me all right? Yeah, all right, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. My name is Joel Dreesen. I am the Deputy Program Manager for the Air Monitoring Program at Maryland Department of the Environment. I'm also the air quality forecaster, air quality meteorologist for the state. For any of you who have gotten a warning on your phone or seen it on the National Weather Service, those air quality alerts that you get come from someone like me in your particular state, and the states issue those air quality warnings. So I wear a couple hats, and my role at the state is really to connect science to constituents. That's both at the state level, at a policy level, and also at the public level with those like air quality alerts. And those two hats, within those two hats, I really am of the opinion that Earth observations in the end exist to benefit humanity. So for everything that we do, it's to benefit the people that we serve. EO, or Earth observation tools, provide tools to do both of those things in my job. Now, it's not the only tool, but I think it's a great asset that it brings to the table for us to use. Now, for policymakers, I don't apologize. I don't know enough about my audience here, so I back up just a second. The state is responsible for meeting the federal air quality standards that are set by the EPA. We have to do that by implementing certain policies or certain practices to make sure that the air quality levels in our state meet those health standards. And then we get a pat on the back from EPA and said, okay, you're fine. We haven't reached that yet. And the unfortunate thing is in Maryland, we have lost all of the low-hanging fruit, meaning that there's no huge policies that exist anymore that we can really enact on a large scale that allow us to continue to wide-scale benefit the public. And in that sense, we are no longer hitting it with a sledgehammer, but we're taking a knife and we're trying to find out what is going to make the biggest difference. It has come to the point where hours matter for attaining these federal standards. We can't do that as easily without Earth observations that can get to the hour. And that's where it becomes exciting with the TEMPO satellite that has been launched recently. TEMPO is, I think everyone in this audience probably knows TEMPO, but not assuming that, it's a recent satellite from NASA. It can get hourly observations that we've never seen before. Particularly of interest to the state would be VOCs, formaldehyde and NO2. And when we can see those in real time and hourly observations, it gives us a better idea of what's happening on a diurnal cycle so that we can figure out what policies might be relevant to reach our goals. Now, that's on the policy side. I don't actually write the policies. All I do is try to deliver the best science, but those policy decisions have huge dollar values behind them. And there's huge implications for the people making those decisions. So I don't take the science that I deliver lightly at all. It's stress out about it sometimes, honestly. Now, in the future too, we are talking about GeoXO, and GeoXO is just the next evolution of these great observations that are going to be helping the state out. Now, hopefully by that time we're in attainment. But by then, EPA might also have lowered the health standard, and we're going to be back out of attainment again. So the whole cycle starts all over again. But in the end, we want to serve the public by providing them cleaner air from an air side. Now, on the operations side, like I said, I'm a forecaster. I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you out there have seen the dust plumes of recent across the United States? Okay, great. This crowd is probably familiar with that. Now, how many realize there could be a dust plume that actually is reaching us today in Maryland? Okay, so it actually might get far enough. It depends how much has fallen out overnight. I haven't seen the satellite. The sun's just rising, so I haven't gotten quite an update. But yeah, the plume from West Texas might actually be reaching us today. Now, that does not impact my air quality forecast, but I at least let people know that we might see some dirty rain. It's possible. We'll see how much dust is actually out there. But that is the type of critical information that I need to deliver it to my constituents if there is an air quality alert to consider. And I want to pivot just a little bit. It's not just about me issuing an alert. I typically don't like to think about this in this light, but in this audience, in this conversation about economy, I think we can have a conversation about health is money, and protecting people's health is an economic benefit. And a lot of times we don't think about it that way, but if you can imagine a society where we don't have any sicknesses, we don't have any illnesses, imagine for a second that the dust from West Texas is indeed carrying valley fever. What in that case can we apply and help our constituents and know that that's there? Now, there's no way I can confirm that that is there or not, but the idea is by improving the air, we can improve health, and then that does impact our economy as well. And so that I appreciate that. The Earth observations give me the right tools to inform the people that I need to make the proper decisions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time. Does anybody in the audience have a quick question for Joel? Go ahead. I see at least one hand in the back. And I'll ask you one just while we're getting to that question. What do you see as the connection with businesses? Like when you issue an air quality alert or other things, what's the impact on businesses? Do you get complaints? Is accuracy important?
Schools are the first thing I think that are concerned. Do I take my kids outside or not? Businesses itself, if we get calls,
You're good.
if we get calls, I typically don't get those myself. The impact to businesses that I know that could exist is a business cannot run like a generator. If they need to test a generator on that day, they shouldn't be allowed to. That's kind of been in flux in recent years, but that has been the impact in the past. Thanks.
And we had the question in the back of the room.
Hi, Brooke Shu, NASA Goddard. I had a question about, Joel, what you see your role in your position at Maryland Department of the Environment in advocacy for cross-state collaboration in monitoring air quality. As you rightly pointed out, dust plumes move, air masses move from one state to another. And I know oftentimes Maryland is downwind of some of the coal plants that are to the west of us, which impacts our air quality directly. So in your position, what kind of role do you take to make that advocacy that, there needs to be that coordination among states?
Well, part of my job, only 5 minutes to talk about what I do, right? So part of my job is to coordinate modeling, national air quality modeling for what's called the State Implementation Plan. And so we coordinate with our university partners. The Maryland Department of the Environment can't do the lifting. That's just a technicality we don't have the technical bandwidth to really do that on our own. So we outsource that to University of Maryland, and they do the modeling to actually show the cross-state transport. And for coordination from other states, then the policy writers, right? So I deliver the science, the other people that actually write the policy then will take that science, and then the legislation that they'll try to put forward will oftentimes try to go to the national level. The most successful one was the NOx SIP call. That's been 2 decades out now, but the NOx SIP call was a federal legislation that you need to reduce NOx, and that took ozone values and PM values down across the entire eastern United States. We're trying to do that same kind of collaboration now, where we're showing that that is still happening. But as far as my role is basically delivering the modeling that shows that is indeed happening. That's again on that hat. On the other hat, or the forecasting side, I'm literally calling, like the smoke events in 2023, I'm literally calling all of the state forecasters around me and talking to them about what needs to happen, what communications we're giving out. And so that's the other role that happens.
Great. Hey, thank you very much, Joel. I do want to point out that Irene Parker from NOAA wanted to be here today, got pulled away for a last-minute meeting. And our next speaker will be Professor Hertzfeld. Take it away.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks to the AAS. Thank you for inviting me. It's a big crowd, and I'm pleased to see it. There are 2 different topics that are related that I was asked to talk about. And this is more as opposed to the practical level that Joel was just talking about on the theoretical level. The relationship between measuring economic benefits from science in general, and then specifically focusing a little bit on Earth observations. Both are difficult and abstract topics to relate to the general public. In other words, how do you get support for the very worthwhile programs that are being done? And I think the major problem is the money, the benefits that we're seeing now from satellites, even the recent ones you've been launching, but ones that are up there, they don't really appear for about 20 years. From the time you decide to do something, you get the funding, you do the research and build it, and then get the launch, and then make sure it's guided and in the right location, and so on and so forth. So that when the public sees that weather picture on the on the TV news every night, or we look at a Landsat image, we don't think about that. We just think about how it's useful to us.
Yeah.
So that actually putting that into dollars, and the economists that have looked at this problem for many years still have trouble with it. And we know what the benefits are out there, but telling that story is much better done through your specific examples that, excuse me, than it is looking at the theory behind it. So, you know, we had in our conversations earlier talked about Earth observations, Landsat, for example. I mean, the first Landsat satellite was launched over 50 years ago, 1972. NASA launched it. It wasn't until the 80s when the technology was really mature enough to think about transferring that out of NASA, and NOAA ended up with the operational end of it, USGS now for Landsat. And they're very different mentalities among the two agencies, one doing research and one doing operations. There was somebody just last week referred me to a study I hadn't seen done by USGS on Landsat benefits. And they come up with a nice large 25 or so billion dollars. I think that's cumulative, not per year. And they don't compare it to the costs of building Landsat, although they do talk about that a little bit. But they're looking at the value of each image and what that adds up to, not the secondary and tertiary benefits that we get. And the other thing is that just looking at the picture years ago was what we had, and it was interesting, maybe over time. But today, what's really important, not only is the timeliness, which you mentioned, Joel, but what we would call situational awareness, that you have to combine those images with demographic data, financial data, and user data, and so on, to get the entire picture of their value. So it isn't just the image, that's part of the full picture. And putting that all together is important. We use it every day in our cars, and combining it with GPS information and other navigation tools. But sales and revenues are not enough. And we're facing that, and we faced it before. And now that technology is even more mature, the uses are multiplying, we still don't know the exact numbers. Also, Earth observations, I have to say this, is small potatoes in what we're talking about in the world, both in the science funding and in these economic benefits. When we deal with the economic benefits from space, the largest private sector revenue it comes from the DirecTV and the telecommunications. That's in the 130 or so billion dollars a year, maybe a little more. It's not growing that much because of streaming and broadband capabilities. But when you see the numbers for remote sensing, Earth observations, they're in the 10 to 15 billion. That's grown quite a bit, so the 1 or 2 a number of years ago. But somebody mentioned to me, who knows these numbers the other day, how many observations do we really need? And if the real value is in quick knowledge, you know, if you're looking at where the schools of fish are in the seas, you want to know that immediately. And we're not quite there yet, and certainly getting the information out. And yet, when I compare it with when I was first at NASA, actually, I remember going out to Goddard, and I remember seeing those big computers and the big tape drives with the Landsat information on it. And their major problem was getting that to state, even to state and local governments for usage, because they didn't have broadband capabilities or the little computers we have on our cell phones right now. So things have changed a lot. but measuring the economic benefits of those has not. And this is a tough uphill battle to get current funds, which are not going to benefit any administration, for example, in power. You're benefiting administrations far out in the future. So they're there. That's why we're here. We do these things, but it is a hard sell. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a minute or two for a quick question for Henry. Henry, I just had one, and
Okay.
do you see that the economic drivers for EO have changed dramatically, either over the long term or recently?
It's a difficult question to answer because it's not just the commercial and the private uses of EO. We all know that there's an intelligence and defense community out there that's always been a very big user. The others, the private sector, as everybody knows, there's small satellites and constellations, Planet and other companies that also provide that information. And we face significant international competition in the commercial world with worldwide imagery. Often just go to your computer and download an image. It's not necessarily the analysis you want to get the benefits, but the data are out there. So I think the maturity, the reliability, the number of sources of the data has grown tremendously. But again, we still don't have those measures. We do know that there's activity.
Gotcha.
And that it's growing and it's important, but we don't have.
Yeah, I'll just throw one more in because I don't see any hands up, but I'll just throw one more in. Even building on some of the things that Joel talked about, like say, hey, well, we're improving people's health, let's say, right? How do we consider those kinds of things in a dollar sign framework?
With great difficulty.
Okay.
And just think about one thing. I remember doing a study on life sciences and some of the economic questions. When you look at NIH and the government and companies, they're trying to cure people. NASA's main job in terms of life sciences has been to keep astronauts in particular, but healthy people healthy.
Mm.
And so when we talk about health, we talk about spin-offs. When other agencies talk about it, their entire budget is oriented differently. So that makes it a difficult problem to analyze. And again, it's not all a positive because you have to net out what ages, what are you talking about people who are working? Are you talking about children? Are you talking about seniors? And I think the way this all gets measured could be very difficult to parse out.
You raise a really good point too, kind of on the mission bleed. That happens. A lot of times we talk about like the dual use of satellites for defense and other things, and people will point out, well, those other agencies have a much bigger budget to do that. Oh, we got a question up over here. Mike behind you.
My name is Oreste Reale, SSAI. So the question I have is for earth science and earth science data, one of the challenges that appears to be in the future is the difficulty of continuing to release them for free with a shrinking budget. If this data depend only upon federal funding, it's clearly that there are some issues there. So it is quite obvious that we need to find new creative ways of generating revenue in order to continue supporting the release of data that are of great importance for the study of the Earth, and also, of course, for safety issues, for health issues, and so on. So the question I have, what are the possibilities? 30 years ago, I remember, I'm quite old, there used to be fees to even to download something like reanalysis, which is a very basic product and now is distributed. You had to pay some small fee, no matter where you were. And this model, of course, has been abandoned in favor of the open science, which is a great and noble initiative. But the question is, how could NASA start to find some ways that still allow the idea of open science, but enable to generate some revenue for products that have great economical implications, like maybe creating a commercial user against the science user? Is this possible from a legal perspective, from the practical perspective, to try to find some way of selling this data at reasonable prices in order to basically compensate for the loss of funding? That's the question.
You're raising a question that's been debated for many years. And as you correctly pointed out, it's a policy issue. It's not a legal issue. And it's also an internationally competitive issue. So that to get the maximum benefits out of the data, providing free data is important. But I also have to point out there are many different types of data that we're talking about here. There's even the simplest is raw data coming out from the satellite, pre-processed, processed data, and then the most valuable are the analyzed data. So that at what level are you charging? And for very specific purposes, the analyzed data is pretty much a private sector operation. And you pay companies who have the expertise to solve a problem you may have, whether it's energy distribution or water, or you're looking at precision farming, things of that sort. Those aren't free. Even if the government does provide free data. Also, there are other nuances in here. The commercial companies like Planet and others that have that operate satellites often sell their data through subscription licenses, and they will limit what you can do and what you can transfer, so that they can sell multiple copies and to different, of course, customers. Whereas with the government, when it gives out free data, it's there. In the United States, we don't copyright those data, and they can be transferred and used any way you want to use them. So that there are a lot of sub-questions under your general question, and at a high level, should the government charge for what taxpayers have paid for? Again, we have come out differently in different areas on that, whether there's intellectual property, a patent or copyright or not. So it's a nice idea to think that the government can collect revenues, but the total benefits from the free data may be larger without the charging for that basic data.
Thanks, Henry. We're going to let Joel comment, and then we'll go to the last topic.
It's real quick. The state can't afford it, and you will lose all your state customers. If you start charging, unless there's some tiered model that works, we can't afford it. I mean, Maryland's $3.3 billion in debt anyway. So like, if you haven't seen that already, we can't pick a requisition for a satellite. That just won't work.
Anyhow, point was well taken. I'm going to cover a little bit of open data and the use of it in my talk. Can we go to the first slide? Oh, is it?
Here it is.
Well,
Right in front.
all right. Thanks. Hey, and if anybody wants to go and refill on coffee, it's totally fine. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story now, okay? And so even before the administration change, which seems like a very long time ago, it's been a hard week. We were talking about ways to explain how our data is used. And we realized that, we knew a lot about how other federal agencies were using it. We knew how the private sector was using it. We knew how some companies were using it. We had these vague ideas, like we knew Wall Street was using it, but we didn't really know how. We thought they mostly got the data from like third-party providers. But we said, everyone is interested in this. We should find out how the private sector is really using the data. So one of the first things we did was go look at the server logs from our data systems group. And we were shocked at what we found. Okay. Of the Fortune 100 companies, and we literally just used the names and did a search looking at like user addresses, 74% of them are using NASA data. And when I say using, major user of some data sets, like they are the leading user of it, et cetera. Also, all sectors. The other really curious thing was, and what was interesting was there were widely disparate views on this. Like I had talked to somebody at a major aerospace company who was like, oh, you don't really need to help the private sector. They got everything you need. I had talked to somebody at an investment bank who was like, no, your stuff, it's not in a long enough time series. We can't use it. And it was just completely wrong. And not only are they using the major stuff like Landsat, et cetera, they are using what I would consider some of our hardest to use, and maybe I won't use the word obscure, but products that were not intended ever for sort of a commercial use. One really good example of this is the JEDI LiDAR. Ralph Dubaya from UMD, not far from here, I believe, was the PI, built by Goddard. I see this up here in the front row. This is a LiDAR that's on the space station that was specifically intended to map ecosystem structure all over the globe for us to understand things like changes to ecosystems, the carbon cycle, et cetera. It turns out that some companies were using this to literally evaluate fire risk around areas they were interested in. What's funny too, and this is a theme I'm going to bring up later, we had other products they could have used, but they were hiring staff at the company itself to use this data to do that. Another product we were surprised that people are using is what's called black marble. And what you're looking at here, we generally use this after disasters to look at where the lights have gone out. This is Hurricane Ian over Florida. You can see the changes before and after the hurricane. It turns out major financial companies are using this data all the time. They're some of the biggest users of it. They may be looking at economic activity. We don't really know. But it extends beyond this. Turns out major automobile manufacturers are downloading loads of data. Literally every single sector you can think of, from insurance to agriculture. Chemical manufacturing companies are downloading heaps of data. Super briefly, this is our set is our online training. They're instructor led. We've been offering them for over a decade. Don't make too much about the absolute heights. What I want you to understand though is just this is 2015 to 24. The top kind of cap, that kind of purpley pink, that's private sector participations in the program. It's grown by over a factor of 10 just in the last 10 years. The other curious things were none of the company, I should back up for a second. So after we looked at the server logs and looked at how people were using it, we set out going and interviewing the companies one-on-one, literally. And we didn't do this in a very structured way. A team from Goddard, a team from headquarters, we worked together. We started finding people through LinkedIn. A couple of amazing things came out of that. As soon as we contacted companies, they were very interested. They got back to us. People got their bosses on the phone. We talked to a communications company. Communications. 6 people who were hardcore remote sensors and a vice president. At the end of the conversation, they wanted a partnership with us to use the data more effectively. Okay. I just want to change gears for a second, kind of to address something Henry said, right? Commercial satellite data is also very, very important to these companies, right? Especially things like high resolution type products. We work very closely with these companies, NASA and other agencies like NOAA, NGA, et cetera. We buy data from these companies. We're a really important market for them outside of DoD. In our CSDA program, a lot of the technologies that we've developed, some of these companies are actually flying. On top of that, too, we evaluate the data for them. That's part of our agree to purchase data, is we do a very, very detailed evaluation process. We kind of jokingly call it the good housekeeping seal of approval. We publish a report online and things. They also use our satellites, and it kind of gets back to Antonio's question about free and open data, right? They use our data and things for CalVal. There are also some amazing public-private partnerships that are coming at us. NASA's Harvest Project, which looks at international agriculture. This is data from the company Planet, using tools that Harvest developed on NASA satellites over a long period of time. This is Ukraine. A couple of years ago, when the war first started, Ukraine wasn't sure that they could release wheat to the international market. this would have a staggering effect on not just wheat prices, but availability of wheat in places like Africa and Asia and just food availability, period. But because of this work with EO, the Ukraine ministry was able to determine that they could export wheat. They would still have enough internally, even though the war was on. This prevents shocks to the market, right? A couple of other lessons learned that came out of here, and I only have a couple more slides. And again, back to Antonio's question about selling data and open data and things, right? One of the interesting points from all of the 40 some odd companies we interviewed was that they love open data for a bunch of reasons. Part of it is that they can use it any way they want. If they want to show it to their customers, they can do that. And these are even companies that sell other data. They take this data and they use it kind of as the basic selling point. On top of that, they know everything there is to know about the data, right? The algorithms are published. There's calibrations that's tracked throughout the course of the thing. And that makes them much more comfortable with it because they are literally building $100 million work streams based on it. And that was another shocking thing was we spoke to these companies. One of the questions we asked was, hey, what would happen if the data got turned off? And they would stop the meeting and go, what? And we would say, well, we're not going to do that. Like it wasn't a threat. And they were like, no, is that a real threat? Like they were immediately like, they went into like risk mode because they were like, and I've gotten texts saying, hey, Tom, this is $100 million question for us. What's going on? So it's kind of, and Henry, what I'm going to ask you later on is like, how do we account for those kinds of things? All right, there's a lot of challenges, right? First thing, the data is still too hard to use. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. The data is too hard to find. We have major products that we told the companies about. They had no idea that it existed. Some of these are products that we have spent tens of millions of dollars developing that exactly solve a problem they have. And then the last one, and I say this to anybody in the room who's a commercial data provider, it is obvious that there are unmet needs out there in both the private and the public sector where there is already an EO product that can solve that problem. Maximum flood height, for example. And again, kind of more one for Henry when we get to discussion. You know, when I read stats like this from the World Economic Forum, you know, we talk about like EO becoming a $3.8 trillion business, you know, in the next 10 years. And what's interesting is people roll their eyes when they read this for a whole bunch of different reasons, right? From the how do you measure it? What does that really mean? Some of this is subsidized. But I'm going to say, I personally believe that we are at a major inflection point, okay? One of those very, very serious business changes that we are in the middle of right now. I'll ask a question of the audience. How many people used an LLM this morning? How many people know whether they used an LLM? Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, there's a good chance you already used one. If you used a search engine on the internet, that little thing that comes up the top, that was written by a large language model, right? A couple of years ago, those things were in academic journals, right? Now they're in our daily lives. They take all the data, they sum it up, they can help us write our business letters now and things. The next thing that's happening, and Google and Microsoft and IBM and the whole NVIDIA and all the other companies are working on GeoAI. What you're looking at there is our first forays into it. It's called a foundation model. And what we did was take what's called the Harmonized Landsat and Sentinel data set, our most popular product, and run it through computers to literally link every pixel and every relationship in the data. So you don't have to find the clouds and pull them out. You put it in and it will do it for you. We are at the nascent stages of this, right? It still does things like hallucinate. But this is really going to democratize access. I was asked to be on a panel not long ago where they said, well, Tom, we want to talk about the risks of AI to using remote sensing data. And I was like, risks? This is going to make it easier for everybody. Are there a lot of questions about this? Yeah, some of our more exotic algorithms where you combine it with local data and things, sure. But just understand, this is going to change the way that we collect data, use data, and the full range of questions that we can start to answer, okay? And with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll throw it open to a couple of questions for me before we get to general discussion.
No, yeah. Just want to add a couple of things to what you said. The day without space is one way to measure it. if you can assume, whenever we've had a satellite fail to operate properly, and whatever company has been using it, for example, like pagers in the 1990s, up in arms because they didn't buy insurance.
Mm.
They didn't have yet another alternative way of providing those data. So again, it's a theoretical approach, but it's one that would get people upset.
Yeah.
If we didn't have, if the capabilities were lost. There's another thing though, the U.S. licensing policy, regulatory policy for Earth observations. Since the 1992 Land Remote Sensing Act has been very restrictive for many, many years. I think over about 20 years, we issued 19 licenses, something like that, and none for synthetic aperture radar. But we had the technology. It was just compartmentalized within the government and within the various dual use restraints.
Yeah.
About in August of 2020, NOAA implemented a new licensing policy with 3 tiers, and the number of licenses that have been issued and much more rapidly to private companies has increased manyfold. I don't have the exact number, but it's dramatic. And it reflects the ability of our companies to compete internationally and to be much more innovative in what they do. And I also think the mentality has changed from worrying about resolution of imagery to what instruments are you using, particularly the radar, and what are those capabilities that have greatly increased accuracy and uses. So we've done some things, but for many years we didn't.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thanks, Henry. Hey, I'll go to the audience. Any questions from anybody or comments? Okay, I see a hand in the middle and one in the way back.
Hey, good morning. Thanks very much. Mr. Wagner, this question is directed to you. One of the things you briefed was that the Earth observation data was hard to find and difficult to find and hard to use. So 2-part question, who were the stakeholders responsible for getting after that? And then what options have you put on the table so far to solve for that complexity? Thank you.
Okay, so the stakeholders can be anybody. Like we literally consider our stakeholder the taxpayer and in all their forms, right? From state and local government all the way through to the private sector. We have traditionally approached this in a variety of ways. We have these amazing web portals where you can go in and type it into search, and almost all of our stuff is open so that it can be trolled by the major search engines. What we've realized though is that is clearly not enough. So a couple of ideas we have going forward, we are going to try to optimize more for the large language model type searches. We are also developing portals very, very specifically for the private sector so that they can get to the data sets that we're finding might be most useful to them. I might also say too, and I think, and there may be other people that want to comment on this. What's clear to me, and I've been in earth science for over 20 years, at NASA for 16, things have changed a lot recently in that we're also finding a lot of the companies we would talk to, they're hiring PhDs from places like University of Maryland that have done postdocs at Goddard and things. And so and they're relatively young people, right? They're all, I think we're seeing a shift and we're just a little bit behind the curve is maybe the simplest way to put it. I know we had a question in the far back of the room, and then we have one over here on the left.
Good morning, Tom. I'm Sumera Thompson King. With your data, when you looked at the server logs, can you talk to us about who you were expecting to see, and did you really see them? And then the second question is, what about foreign companies or foreign governments? Can you tell us about how many folks are using that data?
Yeah,
Thanks.
so very specifically, what I expected was to see third-party companies that were data resellers. That is what, and initially when we talked about it, we thought that was who we had to talk to, and it turns out that wasn't the case. Not that there aren't lots of those companies and we've talked to a bunch of them doing amazing work. It's just that we didn't expect a chemical company to be directly reliant on EO data the way that they were. Foreign is tremendous. Some of the biggest downloaders of our data are foreign countries and foreign companies too. And it's fascinating. I was only the other interesting thing I want to throw in here, a lot of the companies said they also rely on data from ESA, data from JAXA, that's open data. And they said, hey, NASA as a leader, can you ensure our access, get us easier access? Some of those data we actually mirror to support US uses, but it's an important question going forward. And I think there was a question right over here.
Hey, Tom, Joel. I'm Stephanie
Hi, Stephanie.
Scholar-Dews from NASA Goddard, and I'm the Applied Science Manager there in the Earth Science Division. So I think a lot about your question. And I'm not worried about private sector companies for the reasons Tom mentioned. They're hiring a lot of qualified people, but I have been working closely with the county and the state, and those are the groups that I worry don't necessarily have the infrastructure and they need some help, and they don't have the funding, as Joel mentioned. And so doing examples with them and enabling, really democratizing access through sometimes directed funding or ROSES projects helps these other groups. So I guess it's not so much a question. My question is a little bit about the situation we're in now with funding and the projects, the ROSES, the directed funding, not wanting to see the help to these other users go away. Can you comment on that at all?
Sure. I want to say one thing very directly too. If you haven't been thinking about GeoAI and you are in this business, you have to start. This is like the internet for us, okay? This is for real. It's really coming. And I really firmly believe it's going to solve some of the problems that Stephanie's talking about, right? For simple questions. The more advanced stuff, I think it's going to be many years, right? It doesn't go away. But here's the other thing, and I say this to the data providers and us working at NASA, the need for the data doesn't go away. This is a fantastic tool. We're not solving the problem of data collection with AI. However, I firmly believe that it might change what it is that we need to measure, right? And I will say too, a lot of people at NASA, NOAA, and other places are thinking about these things. In terms of support, one of the things we've done in NASA, I lead a portfolio called Earth Action that includes support to develop tools at the state, local, tribal level and on up. We plan for that to continue. We're always subject to the budget, but I can tell you that those programs are popular. Go ahead, Joel.
I just want to say thanks to NASA and any other partners. Like Stephanie has been a great proponent. She mostly worked with water, so I don't always work directly with her, but she's been a great proponent. And that kind of partnership with NASA really helps at the state level kind of get us over some of those curves and challenges that Tom had brought up. So I just want to say thanks.
Go ahead, Henry. Okay. Any other questions out there? Go ahead, Antonio. Did I get the name right, Antonios? Sorry. I tried.
So just sort of returning on the previous question, I just ask the three of you to comment about two agencies, National Center, two centers, National Center for Environmental Predictions, which releases all the forecasts from the global weather range, regional and climate, and S2S, seasonal to subseasonal. And on the other hand, we have the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. And I am a pure meteorologist at heart, and unfortunately, it's very sad to admit that the skill of the ECMWF is still superior to NCEP, in spite of NCEP being extremely good. And ECMWF is run as a private organization. You have a website where you purchase the data, you put them into a cart, you want to get daily data of a certain region, and it's completely privatized in spite of being run by the organization. So every country in Europe has to pay a certain amount to get their forecast, but also anyone in the world can access to that information, and they are essentially still the first. So the question is, why NCEP is behind ECMWF in spite of America having much better resources in terms of potential amount of people and knowledge. And what do you think about these two models? I mean, this is just a free comment about comparing these two centers, and just I'm curious to see whether you have thought about it and what is so special about ECMWF that they can afford the idea of being basically essentially being run as a private organization and selling a product.
I can't comment on the details, but what I can tell you is this, right? Remember, it's an international community of science. What is in some of the models at NCEP has come from work of US scientists and also together in the international community. Moving forward from here, you know, I think there's tremendous possibilities with AI and the statistical approach that I know that they are now using. And I also know NOAA is talking about those things too going forward. Anybody on the panel want to throw anything in?
I'm not familiar with the policies of either of those organizations, but I just in general comment, the European approach has always been a little bit different. The Galileo satellite, for example, system, for example, has a private intermediary between the government satellites and the customers. Germany's remote sensing system, same thing. They set it up as a private partnership. Now, there are other legal risks. There are benefits to that. We do it differently. And again, GPS is a parallel. We have the free signal that we provide worldwide. We always have done that, which has certain advantages over charging for a signal or even a private company being in charge of distributing that. So it's just a different approach. I think when you come down to the end of it, taxpayers are still essentially funding it, because even in Europe, when those programs may not pay for themselves, they're based on government. A lot of their funding is based on government loans and guaranteed loans, so that there's a direct involvement throughout.
Great. Hey, and with that, I think, you want last word? Go ahead.
That's okay. We need to move on.
Yeah, we need to wrap.
Well, actually, I have one online question.
Oh,
if
okay,
you're-
go ahead.
If you're willing. So the question is NASA considering advancing the impact or thinking about considerations about advancing the impact of free, public, very good data from new systems? So things like, Landsat with finer spatial resolution, improved spectral resolution, faster repeat collection. What's NASA thinking on that?
Yeah, so I would encourage the person to ask the question, go and look online about the plans for the next Landsat mission. It has more bands. It's actually 3 satellites. There's a lot of information out there on it. And with that, I believe that we are out of time, Jim. All right. I want to say thank you to our panelists and speakers. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you to the audience. Great question.